Radical Secular, a video series dedicated to the separation of church and state and the pursuit of justice.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular. I'm Christoph Defoe.
And I'm Sean Prophet.
It is a somber, deadly time in America as COVID-19 ravishes every region of the country. Today, we're joined by our friend and friend of the show, Joe Occhipinti, to discuss all things COVID-19. But first, we'll discuss the status of the COVID relief bill in Congress. We'll talk about the latest in the Trump coup attempt saga fucking thing. We will draw a connection between corporate law firms and child slavery. And we'll also discuss briefly the first female captain of an American supercarrier. But before we get into any of that, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to smash that red subscribe button. And be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your podcast host and write us a review over at Apple. Positive podcast reviews at Apple help us grow in their recommendations list faster than almost anything else. And tell your friends and family about our show. Word of mouth matters.
Email us at theradicalsecular@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @radical_secular. Follow us on Twitter at Radical Secular. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcasts at Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Okay, let's get into the t-shirts. Sean, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, I'm wearing a retread today, and this is my There Are Four Lights shirt.
Nice,
and
classic.
I had to wear it today because there are fucking 81 million votes, God damn it.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's truth.
It's just so insane. It's so insane. We're going to talk more about this, but this is reality. We live in reality. We don't live in the bullshit zone. So.
Oh boy, yeah, and look, I mean, my shirt is similar. So this is actually a Bad Religion shirt, and there's a reason for that. I'll just show it off first.
Love it.
And what it is they cut off head of, I believe, the David sitting on a chair, like a car seat, and the whole idea, the album name is called The Age of Unreason. And we're going to be talking about reason today in this show, and the failure of reason that has brought the United States to this point in this pandemic. But also, it turns out Bad Religion, my favorite band, as everybody who listens to this show with any regularity knows, or knows me at all, knows is my favorite band, is at 40 years. And they put out and because they can't do shows, they can't go on tour like they normally would right now. What they've done is they recorded 4 live performances, I think at the Hollywood Palladium, which is their like home ground. And they did 10 years in the 80s, so the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and so each one of those shows reflects one of those decades, so it's going to be fucking awesome. It's all streaming live, or not streaming live, but it's streaming, available streaming. So I'm looking forward to diving into that later on this week. So pretty fucking exciting if you are Christoph Defoe, for sure.
I'd like to check it out. You know, I'm woefully unfamiliar with that band. I should be familiar with that band, but I haven't. It just wasn't in my orbit, and I'm sure I would love it.
Yeah, totally, man. And you're a Southern California guy, you know. Yeah. They're a Southern California band, man, you know. Yeah.
All true.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's get into the news. And we're going to begin in Washington. And let's just fucking say it. Trump and the GOP, at the time, it was attempting a coup straight up, and they kind of still are, but now we also know that they have been run up against a lot of roadblocks, but they certainly tried a fucking coup straight up.
It's a fucking coup.
Explicitly.
It's a coup. It's a coup. It is
explicitly.
A coup is a coup whether you succeed or not.
Exactly. And that is so important. And I think it's important that we say that explicitly, because some of the news media are not going to say that. But I think it's important to say that explicitly, because if we don't, we sort of sanction this kind of behavior. And look, the good news is that the federal court system, including the courts with Trump appointed judges, which is crazy, has held fast. The Supreme Court refused on Tuesday to refused to stop Pennsylvania from finalizing President-elect Joe Biden's victory in the state, despite allegations from allies of President Trump that the expansion in mail-in voting was illegal. Also indicted future convict Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a suit suing for battleground states to invalidate their election results. We now know that failed, thankfully. And also, I think another little fun point here is that Trump is considering counter-programming the Biden's inauguration. I want to take your temperature. Of course he is. I would take your temperature on this, Sean. Go ahead. Just react to that. What are your thoughts?
Oh, goddamn. I have so much to say on this. I mean, there are two alternative universes, in which it is both a coup and not a coup at the same time. Mm-hmm. And the other side thinks Biden is pulling off a coup, and it's insane. There's just we have no consensus in our nation. And the technical term for what Trump is doing is auto coup, literally meaning a coup by a head of state after a lost election intended to subvert democracy and seize power as an autocrat. And that's exactly what he would be doing if he had gotten away with it. And his particular flavor, because coups, they always have their own flavor, and that's why people don't recognize them so much. Mm-hmm. In our country, our culture, it just happened to come through the court system and through the media. But it could have been, other places it's straight up violence. But this one, it's because there's not like overt violence. It's got this kind of elements of both horror and farce. And simultaneously, and this week, as all other weeks since the election, was an emotional roller coaster, because as news of each preposterous new claim from Republicans broke, it was like this constant battle between that's completely ridiculous to could he get away with it? And this is
right.
This is what's been going on since the election. I mean, we didn't know at first, and then on the 7th of November, it was called, and then it's just lawsuit after lawsuit and tweet after tweet and news conference after news conference, and he ruined Thanksgiving. And then days later, he came out with another 45-minute video. It's just gone on and on and on, where this guy will just not shut up. And it turns out this isn't about Trump at all. It's about the enablers. And it wouldn't have mattered what he'd said if the other Republicans had shut him down. But instead, 126 Republican legislators signed an amicus brief supporting this Tex ass, which I call it. Now, Tex ass is now permanently Tex ass. It's just they've lost their, until they turn blue, they're just Tex ass, So they filed this suit, and so did 17 other attorneys general from other states signed on to this. And this lawsuit was dismissed by the Supreme Court 7-2, with Thomas and Alito both saying that the case should have been heard, but dismissed on the merits. So it's like it was really 9-0 defeat on this ridiculous lawsuit. So on the other side, there's this insane proposal by some Democrats to accuse the representatives of sedition and try to block them from being seated in Congress under the 14th Amendment. Now, that's not going anywhere. And I mean, you need to just sort of weigh in here on why this proposal is so legally ridiculous and why Democrats even try shit like this.
Wow. Yeah, man. Look, so this is, I think, an interesting question. And I always preface everything by saying I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm a labor and employment lawyer. And so I'm not going to comment specifically on the legality of this. I think from my perspective, I think that the optics of this politically are really bad. I think it smacks of a couple things: retribution, which doesn't poll well, right? It smacks of temper tantrum, which we see that on the right now, and we know what it looks like. We always talk on the show how we have to be willing to get into the trenches and fight for democracy against and fight fire with fire. But I don't think this is how you do it. I just don't think how you do it, not to mention the fact that it is legally preposterous.
Well, and it's like, so we're basically saying you disenfranchised us, we're going to disenfranchise you, because those are elected representatives, right?
Exactly.
And they just filed a brief. right? You're allowed to sue anyone for anything. So, how is this sedition if it failed, right?
Exactly.
Sedition is, and the 14th Amendment talks about insurrection and rebellion, which is normally, like violence, like they got in the streets with guns. Yeah, they did that. You could probably prevent them from being seated because they'd be in jail. But sure. This is just they signed on to a lawsuit. It was ill-advised. They should be ashamed of themselves, and we should vote them out. That's what we have to do, is we have to campaign against them, not just expect Nancy Pelosi to wave her little fucking magic wand and unseat 126 legislators. That's crazy talk.
It's insane. It's just an insane thing to even say. And again, when you propose something like this, you're undermining your own credibility, right? And because how do you say we're the party that follows the rules? We're the party that and say, oh, we're not going to seat representatives. I mean, come now.
There has to be at least some plausible deniability. I mean, I'm not above some legislative skullduggery and some arm twisting, right?
Absolutely. And that goes to what we're talking about, right? Democrats should be willing to have those kind of fights when it makes sense, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it throws it right back into the political realm, which is the realm of Trump. And of course, within hours after this huge, this is the final loss of his campaign. There's nowhere to go from here. And yet, within a few hours, he's rage tweeting. He's railing against the Supreme Court. He's claiming that even after 60 losses, that the case had never been heard on the merits. Well, what the fuck does he think judges do when they get the brief?
Yeah, I think this is great. And this is important too, right? The reason why the court the case got thrown out is because there's a lot of reasons and even if it were heard on the merits. And by the way, Alito and Thomas said, even if we heard this on the merits, we'd throw it out. But right, the briefs were a joke. They were filled with misspellings, made up states, new California and new Nevada.
I saw that one.
it was an insult. I mean, and by the way, and that is just like purely on what the quality of the briefs are. It's felt like a kangaroo court, and you are trying to basically he was trying to the petitioners were trying to leapfrog the entire federal judicial system and jump right to the Supreme Court based on something called original jurisdiction. And but the problem with that is that this is an issue in the law called standing, and you have to it basically means you cannot sue on behalf of somebody else, right? So the state of Texas, if those states wanted to, if Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania have a problem, then they should bring the lawsuit, not Texas, right? If they have a right, so that's the basis upon which it was thrown out, and it's heartening, frankly, to hear that even this wild conservative batshit court has some tether to legal precedent and to real judicial principles.
I think it actually comes down to the positive side of originalism, because in the sense that these guys are sticklers for every fucking word. Okay.
Yep.
And so that goes against us when we're talking about things like civil rights. But when it comes to things like this, where they're being asked to literally rule in a way that would be the biggest ruling in 100 years or more.
Oh my God. Absolutely.
They're being asked to completely rule in a way that is against the Constitution and that would change the Constitution irrevocably if they did.
It would change the country.
They're saying no. We're going with the Constitution, thanks. And that is the beauty of the fact that they're, the Federalist Society actually, for all we hate them, I mean, their judges came through on this.
They really, really did, man. They are originalists. They are conservatives. They care about the Constitution. And I also want to point out too, we hate John Roberts on this show for a host of reasons. But he cares about the institution of the court. He really, really does. He doesn't want it to become a hack job, a place, And it's notable that there was no dissent from even Amy Coney Barrett, right? The most right-wing judge on that court had nothing to say about this. And I think you're right. I think it does come down to that originalism, that commitment to the actual word of the Constitution. And this is one of those narrow times when it really, really helped us.
Well, and those guys, I mean, they're all religious ideologues, but they're also nationalists. And this was an attack on our nation. It really is an internal attack on our nation, and they're not going to stand for it. So good for them.
Absolutely right. You know what? And we got to give credit where it's due. You and I are very passionate people. We really care about these issues, but at the same time, we're reasonable people, right? And first of all, we'll take the win where we can get it. First of all, I'm not going to cut my nose off to spite my face. And second of all, look, you got to give credit where it's due. You got to give credit where it's due. I'm not going to just hate on people for the sake of hating on people. I hate on people because they do shitty things when they do shitty things, you know?
Well, and what they're preserving our nation for, unfortunately, is what we're going to talk about later, in our segment about these abuses of capitalism. And
absolutely,
so they didn't do this to be good guys. They did this for this capitalistic, abusive nation that we've become. So, you got to take the good with the bad, I guess.
Take the good with the fucking bad. And speaking of which, I want to just sort of talk a little bit about. And I know we're both going to be really outraged about this because it's fucking outrageous. Right there, we're living in. We want to talk about what I think is criminal, which is the negotiations on the COVID-19 relief package. Right, there has been a moratorium in place. Those of us probably listen to the show. You and I have been fortunate enough to be able to pay our rent and pay our mortgages, but a lot of people have not been able to do that because they don't have jobs. There's a moratorium that exists right now on evictions. It's about to expire. We know there's 50 million people in this country that are going hungry. State and local governments don't have enough money to even distribute the vaccines. If they get it, there are no fucking jobs. Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell, I hate Donald Trump. I really do. But you know who I really fucking hate, Sean? I really fucking hate Mitch McConnell. He is pure evil. He is holding up the COVID-19 relief negotiations because he wants a permanent, not temporary. There's a temporary one already in place. He wants a permanent liability shield for corporations. And he knows that once Biden gets to the White House, he will have less leverage to do the bidding of his corporate overlords. And he wants corporations to be able to force their employees back to work and not be liable when those employees die of COVID-19. Also, and after this, I'll hand it off to you. He knows that a bad economy is bad for Biden, right? So he doesn't care what happens to the economy. He's betting that voters will blame the bad economy on the person who's in the White House come after January. So he's setting this up. So how fucking despicable is this, Sean?
Well, look, I mean, we talk about this pretty much every week. It's the same problem. And the problem is people versus property. The problem is money versus lives. And this is where we are in this country, where we finally, I mean, there's been rhetoric. Our country has always been, has had a problem with being too corporate and too friendly to corporations and not helping people. But it used to be there was at least some bipartisanship that government policy should help people. And I think lately, since Obama got in and they really started putting the hammer down, really put the screws down, they have been unabashed. They've been absolutely open about the fact that they don't give a shit. And they just, I mean, what was the deal that happened where there were people, it was when Paul Ryan was still in, and there were disabled people who were bringing boxes of petitions about healthcare to his office, and they all got arrested and dragged out of the Capitol building. And this is the symbolic thing that's going on here, because we all know the studies. It's not even about facts anymore. We know that we can save all this money by having a Medicare for all system, and it would hurt the capitalists. And so they're not going to do it, and people are going to die as a result. Many thousands of people every year. So, and this gives me a chance to plug the book that I always go back to, which is Democracy in Chains, and that's Nancy McLean. And this is the plot that's been going on. This is a guy named James Buchanan, and he worked behind the scenes to put this all in place. The Mont Pelerin Society. It's a long book. There's a lot to it, but you have to understand that essentially there's been a 40 to 50 year plan that began under Reagan and probably even Nixon. Starting this whole thing to where they have just put chains on our legislature to prevent us from passing legislation that would help people. And the idea behind this goes back to, there's a libertarian notion that if you let people vote on budgets, they will always vote to raise taxes and give themselves benefits. And this is something that in a functional government should be true. There should be some checks and balances. Otherwise, you bankrupt the government. But for all intents and purposes, the entire purpose of public policy is to help the citizens. And that's been hijacked. It's permanently off the table at this point. And you'll see that as the Biden administration gets going, we're most likely going to see the money taps have been shut off. I mean, we spent $6 trillion this year, including the COVID relief. And for that reason, we've got, the billionaires have gotten $1 trillion richer. The stock market's at 30,000. And meanwhile, we got people in food lines. So this is not an economy that works anymore for citizens. And it's done. I mean, it's like, if we don't get those 2 Senate seats, if we don't get McConnell out of the way, then we're going to be in for a world of hurt. And Biden will not be a successful president because he can only do so much. He can't authorize the spending of money without Congress. And this is a real problem. Lives are at stake.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I can't stress this enough. And I know you know this. I know the people that listen to this show know this, but maybe this is just me kind of venting. But Mitch McConnell knows this is exactly his plan, right? Like, this is not incidental to anything, right? He knows precisely. He doesn't care that people will starve, right? He doesn't care about that. He doesn't care that people will die. He doesn't care that that people are losing their homes, right? They and being kicked out. It's all about, like you said, blocking, just block, right? That's all he has done. And I think you're right that it really ramped up in the Obama era. I think that was a real, Obama's election was a big fuck you to the hierarchy that we talk about all the time, right? And it really supercharged all of these people. We're like, wait, how can this guy, who, by the way, was still paying off his law school loans in the White House because he was an average guy. He really was a normal guy, right? Just like me. Right. He has law school loans. He's not a McConnell. He's not one of these people who are walking in with all this stuff. And like, the fact that he even got in the White House was infuriating to them. In fact, I think Clinton also was infuriating for that same reason. He grew up in a fucking trailer, right? In fucking Arkansas. And now he's president of the United States, right? This sort of thing really pisses these people off. And the last thing they want to do, and we're talking, and at the end of the day, this is pure, unadulterated capitalism, is give money to people who need it. Oh man, it just drives me fucking nuts, man. It just really gets me worked up.
Here's the choice. The choice is similar in the Great Depression. I believe they did this where, if you want to bail out the banks, if you're in a depression and people can't pay their mortgages, you can do one of two things. You can give the banks money and then let them take everybody's homes, or you can just give the homeowners money to pay their mortgages, and that keeps the banks solvent. And it's the same thing with when you're talking about COVID aid or anything else like that, right? You can give the money directly to people like Amazon or the airlines or whatever, or you can just give people money to live and they'll spend it and it'll go back there anyway. And
exactly.
This is what's been going on. I mean, after the 2008 financial crisis, which was partially caused by, again, Republicans spent money during the Bush presidency and they ran the economy flat out. Everybody was getting mortgages that they didn't deserve, and the whole thing went to shit. And so now you had this foreclosure crisis, and who gets rich on the foreclosure crisis? The owner class. Mnuchin got filthy rich foreclosing on people's houses, and now he's rewarded with a Treasury Secretary position. So it's like, I don't know what better way to describe what's going on here than the greatest heist, the greatest wealth transfer from poor to rich in the history of the world.
Absolutely. And it's a system that is a system that McConnell has fine-tuned. So he knows that, right? Go for broke when Republicans are in office, right? And ginny up the economy, get it on a sugar high. Everybody's running around spending money, buying things they don't need. And then when it all crashes, which it inevitably will, just, pass the fucking bag, the shit bag to the Democrat to clean up the problem. And by the way, on top of that, you get to blame the Democrat for the bad economy, and you get a whole constituency of your right-wing constituency who don't have two brain cells to rub together. And they're like, oh yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Since we can't reason from point A to point B, a lot of the theme of the show today is going to be reasoning from point A to point B. Yeah, of course. Like they can't see what we just that timeline that I just sketched out. They can't see that because they can't reason from point A to point B, and they're going purely on tribalism. So you're just like the black Democrat did it, and they'll believe it.
Yep, and the fact is that all of these economic consequences have a time lag. So when you shut off the taps of the spending, and then all of a sudden, it seems like everything's going okay for a few months, and then 6 months later you get the big crash. Now with COVID, I mean, this is the same thing with COVID, which we have our guest later to talk about that. But there's this time lag with COVID where you get sick long after the bad behavior that caused you to get sick. So it's just like I think people on the right are very simplistic in the way they look at things, and so they don't see this other machination that's going on here, and they don't see the delay. And chances are they will if McConnell is successful in turning off the taps of government spending, the economy will tank under Biden, and he will get the blame.
Exactly. And that's the whole fucking plan. And again, always in the service of these sort of corporate overlords. I think he's worth he's now worth like 30 plus or $35 million, something like that, McConnell. Right. So, and his super PAC is incredibly powerful. And it's funding the Georgia, the GOP in Georgia right now. And look, speaking of corporate power, I want to talk to about the next news item, which is a little bit below the radar. And this is the connection between Nestle, that gigantic corporation that it is, and child slavery. So in 2005, a group of agricultural workers in Mali brought a child labor lawsuit against the Nestle Food Corporation. The workers alleged that they had been captured in Mali and then sent to work in the Ivory Coast. For all of our African friends out there, shout out. They say that they were held against their will, beaten, and forced to work long hours for no pay on farms where Nestle sourced its cocoa. Nestle has claimed that it had no idea, of course, that child labor and such flagrant abuses of workers were taking place. Of course, we had no idea. But the lawsuit alleges that the company did know and even paid farmers to do whatever needed to be done to reduce costs. The case had previously been dismissed twice at the early stage, probably at the motion to dismiss stage, which is neither here nor there. But the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, we love the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That is a liberal circuit that encompasses California, Oregon, and all those amazing states. The case involved a law enacted by the very first Congress in 1789, the Alien Tort Statute, which permits foreign citizens to sue in U.S. courts for human rights abuses. The case is now before the Supreme Court of the United States. The justices are being asked to rule on whether it permits lawsuits against American companies. The Trump administration is, of course, backing Nestle. That's nothing surprising there. But what is surprising is that Neil Katyal, liberal darling, and also my former law school professor, argued on behalf of Nestle before the Supreme Court. And he argued, and this is the kicker, he argued that Nestle should be immune from liability for allegedly aiding and abetting child enslavement in the manufacture of its products. Among other reasons, because the Nuremberg prosecutors declined to prosecute the firm that supplied the Zyklon B gas, which Nazis used in the death camps. This was an actual argument.
Shit.
This was an actual argument.
You cannot make this up. You cannot make this shit up. It's like, okay, God, how do you unpack all that? Man, I mean, okay, so let's start out first. My first reaction is I've known about child slavery for a long time. I actually found out about it when I was doing some internet research back in the 2000s. And I was shocked to understand that there's something on the order of, I mean, it's a very high number. I don't know if it's 40,000 or 400,000 child slaves currently, or at that time, worldwide. And there was a film that was made about it. And when the people that went to make the film, they were attacked. They were actually attacked because a lot of people love slavery. It wasn't just in the U.S. This is like in India, the Far East. There's child selling. The parents sell their children for small amounts of money. And we're talking like $100 or something like that. And it's really, really insidious. And the fact that an action against a U.S. corporation actually made it to the Supreme Court, and there's now
it's a miracle,
chance.
Frankly, it's a miracle that it got to that point. A miracle.
There's a chance because everybody wants to sweep this under the rug, and it's both consumers and corporations, because the bargain is like this. You make me this product that I love, and I'll buy it, and you don't tell me where it came from or how you made it. And that's unfortunately, and this runs the gamut from fossil fuels to chocolate to diamonds to anything that can be produced. Clothing is produced. There's a lot of slave labor in clothing. And so people don't really want to know on the one hand, but other people, if they did know, they wouldn't buy it because this is the other side of it, is that corporations are expected to provide a basically ethical product. You assume when you walk into a clothing store that you're not hurting someone by buying a pair of pants.
Right.
You assume when you buy a chocolate bar that chocolate bar, was made where people didn't have to die or be enslaved to make it. So it's a really, capitalism it's probably best. I mean, it's good at innovation, but it's really best at obscuring human suffering and justifying human suffering, by the way. And so this comes down to, of course, corporate personhood, because corporations do this dance where they're both people and not people. When it comes to rights and lobbying and political speech, they want to be people. And when it comes to liability, they don't want to be people. They want to hide behind that corporate shield. And
exactly.
The directors can do whatever they want. They may be fined, but they cannot be held criminally liable except under certain very rare circumstances for their conduct as a corporate officer. And so that allows them to get away with murder, literally.
Yeah.
And there was a film, I mean, a lot of people have seen it. It's an older film called The Corporation. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it, because it has in there, there's about 6 case studies of different examples of malfeasance that have gone on in corporations, including the fact that, another connection to Nazi Germany, that IBM provided the tabulation machines for prisoners held during the Holocaust. And so ethically, there's so much going on that is questionable with corporations, and it's so easy for them to hide. And so when something like this comes out, I think it's really important to just to recognize this is not an isolated incident at all.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And I think you hit on a lot of really important things there, Sean. The least of which is, one of the more important ones, I think, is the idea of corporate limited liability. That corporations have very limited liability, right? Directors are basically unable to be touched. There's a concept called piercing the corporate veil in the law, right? You may have heard of that. And that's the idea that you're able to get through that liability shield, but able to and sort of sue an individual director, let's say. But in order for that to happen, you basically have to have a situation where the corporation and the director are basically the same, right? Like there is no distinction between that person, like right there, that they are effectively operating as a corporation. The corporation's effectively operating as that individual. And in large corporations that we have now, like you're not going to see that, right? I mean, and precisely because these are very. I think the thing about corporations is that they respond directly to incentives. They are intensely rational, right? Intensely rational. So we shouldn't be surprised that they try and successfully. And now there's jurisprudence that supports this. And this is also why this Supreme Court case is so important, because it challenges that jurisprudence. But that jurisprudence basically allows them to kick down liability down the supply chain, right? So it never gets to them. It's not their fault. They didn't know. It's the government of Mali's fault, or it's a government of the Ivory Coast fault, or it's this individual farmer's fault, right?
Oh, they were complying with all the local labor regulations.
Exactly. So what do I know? And I don't know how these people sleep at night. I mean, obviously on beds and beds of money, but we're talking about here, right? Like sort of unbridled corporate power. And this is why things like a liability shield that McConnell, we talked about earlier, McConnell wants, are so insidious. This is why, right? And they want to be able to force people to go die and not be liable for. I mean, that is literally what they're saying. And I want to sort of hit also what you said, which I think is so true. And, you know, I lost my train of thought, but this is what I did want to say, because this is the less obvious issue here, right? I just want to get back to Katyal, right? Because Katyal is, again, liberal darling, and I'm sure he cares about liberal causes. I went to a good law school with a lot of really smart people that are definitely liberals, and they go but most of them go work in big law, just like I did. I worked in big law as well. There's this idea in the law that no matter what, everyone deserves representation, right? So, like, you know, rapists and murderers deserve not just any kind of representation, but competent representation, and that is hammered into one's head as a lawyer. And this is why we, like, you know, lay people may look at a defense attorney that defends a child rapist, for example, right, a child molester, and say, how could you possibly do that? But the thing is, it's like, the idea is, what if you, Sean, were accused of that? We know you didn't do that, right? But everyone might think that you did it, right?
That's right.
And
so, from a criminal standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But when you're talking about civil law,
exactly,
like this, that then crosses over into criminal conduct by a corporation, it's not the same.
It's not the same. It is not the same. But what I'm saying is that people like Katyal, he's working at a big law firm. He's been in and out of the government. He's taught at Georgetown, taught me at Georgetown for that matter. And meanwhile, he goes and this idea that every person deserves representation gets perverted into a justification, right? He is going there and arguing that the Zyklon B argument, like, he's making that argument, and like, how does he go home and say, oh, I'm a liberal? Like, how, like, right? And this is how corporate lawyers, and I used to be a corporate lawyer, I work in a big corporation now, but like, this is how we talk to ourselves and say, hey, well, yeah, we are helping companies violate, and we are helping big companies circumvent the law and deny benefits or whatever else, but we can go home and think we are okay and not violating our ethics because every person deserves representation. And I read a great article about this. It's the New Republic article, and I really recommend it. We'll put it in the show notes. But what do you think about that, Sean?
Well, it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago about the main product of capitalism being this deniability, this distancing from suffering. It's like you're taking the machine of capitalism, and all the minions of this machine, they all play their roles, and the lawyers are very much a part of that, in the sense of giving companies the legal shield to do what they are doing, which the lawyers themselves know is wrong. Like, they wouldn't want it done to them. So
exactly.
And I don't know how. Again, I think the higher you go, the more money you make, the more you have to compromise in those things. And I ran into it myself when I was doing television. It's like, you know, should I be working on ads for SUVs? You know, should I be, you know, would I take an ad for a film that was horribly, unethical, like these Christian films that lie to kids? You know, would I work on that? Would I, what would be my limit? Would I work on a right-wing media project that was, I worked for Fox, but I was in their entertainment division, not their news division. But would I work for Fox News? The answer is no. But I mean, if I was having to choose between that and paying the rent, I think we understand that there are so many people who have to just close their eyes and distance themselves from the results of what they're actually doing. And they pretend that because they don't see the people they're hurting and they don't have blood on their hands, that they're not responsible. And that's just wrong. It's like it's like eating meat,
Yeah.
If you don't kill the animal yourself, somebody else killed it and you get the benefit without the blood. And it's just, capitalism is no different.
That's so true. And it's tough, man. Like, these are hard decisions. I mean, I worked for years at a big law firm, and a labor and employment lawyer. My entire job was to find ways to shield the company from my clients from having to do what I think is right. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the entire fucking job. And especially in that space. And we talk about meat. We talk about I drive a car with an internal combustion engine, right? And I don't feel the real externalities of that day in, day out, right? Luckily, I don't drive that often, or really ever. But still, nevertheless, I own a car with an internal combustion engine, right? I get on airplanes, right? I go on vacation, right? So the question is like, and here's my thing, Sean, and I wonder what you think about this. And that is, yes, I can't help but participate in the society in which I live, right? I can make ethical decisions so I'm not explicitly hurting people, but I have to live and I have to make a living. But what I challenge myself to do is to look at what's actually happening. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not hurting the environment when I get in my car and turn the key, right? Like, I am going to look at that with eyes open and say, like, holy shit, I could be doing better. And certainly voting and doing what it takes to change a system that is broken.
If we know that we're both products of the system and we're perpetrators at the same time. And if you know that you're causing harm, which we all are, I mean, I have trash, I use gas, everything else. I even eat meat. So the point is that if you're going to do that, like, there's a difference between if you take a private jet to go to the Super Bowl, okay?
Right.
Versus taking a private jet to go to a climate conference.
Right.
Okay?
Big difference.
If you're Al Gore and you want to go around the world and you're trying to stop people from burning fossil fuels, you might have to burn some fossil fuels to do it. And this is the big Republican bullshit talking point, that if you use any product, that you're a hypocrite. Well, it's like, then if that were true, then nobody could ever work for change, because we all have to use these products, right?
Exactly.
So, and if we are in a situation like the Nestle thing, okay, we could boycott Nestle. That's easy. There's plenty of other chocolate companies. But I mean, unfortunately, Nestle makes like an ungodly number of
everything
food items that you would buy. So it's really tough. But the point is use the system to monkey wrench the system and make it better.
Absolutely. And well, let's finish off with some good news. There's a couple items here. The Navy has selected a woman to command a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier for the first time in American history. Her name, which is fucking awesome. Her name is Captain Amy it's hard to say her name, Bauernschmidt. Sounds German, I assume. and this isn't the first time she's made history. In 2016, she became the first female executive officer of the XO on a nuclear aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. We like Abraham Lincoln on this show, and also nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. As such, she was second in command of a crew of 5,000 people. Bauernschmidt graduated from the Naval Academy in '94. The same year, women were allowed to serve on combat ships and planes for the first time. She spent much of her career in rotary wing aviation, that's helicopters, on naval vessels. Why is this such an important development, Sean?
Oh, man. I mean, and you caught me right at the perfect time, because I want to talk about Star Trek here, because that's always a great topic. But I've been watching Voyager recently, as well as Discovery, both of whom have very prominent female characters. And, these are clearly fictional universes, but Voyager is a 25-year-old show. And if you can believe that, right around the time when they started letting women into combat roles, here comes Kathryn Janeway, right? And so it's like, and Star Trek portrays women in general anyway in a much more equal role than they've ever achieved in modern America. And, this is changing fast, and it's changing in spite of this constant right-wing attempt to roll back women's rights. And we should be happy about this. I mean, even in the face of all of the Trump fuckery, there's been positive twists and turns in the project of women's rights. And we can't separate this from the Me Too movement, for example, which it almost paralleled the rise of Trump. As things were getting worse with him, women's rights are suddenly now front page news. So it's always been counterpoint for the past 100 years since women achieved suffrage. And, true to form, the male backlash against the empowerment of women has been severe. We could do a whole show on this, on the question of toxic masculinity and how damaging that is to men as well as women. But let's stay on the topic now of women in combat. So the example of Captain Amy Bauernschmidt it's extremely reminiscent of Captain Janeway in Voyager. So And what's great about the series is that it deeply, it's not just about spaceships. It explores these power dynamics of what it takes for a woman to command a mostly male crew. And it's not only sexism you have to think about. It's the very real and delicate line that any woman has to walk to retain her femininity and her dignity while taking no shit and commanding respect from her crew. So I think if more men were really to watch and study Star Trek Voyager, they would have much less of a problem with women in these command or executive roles. Because Kathryn Janeway, she's an icon of women in command. She is such a trailblazer. And I don't even think she probably was aware at the time when she took this role of how important she was going to be. And, you know, we see it's not just like where she's going and what's blowing up. It's her emotional struggles. And she deals with them privately. She struggles with them. You see it in her acting. And they rarely...
Kate Mulgrew, by the way. I mean... Yeah. Unbelievable.
Shout out to her.
Oh my God. That woman can act her fucking ass off. Unreal. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah. But yes.
Well, you know, and none of it doesn't seem like any of these her private struggles impact her command decisions. It's rare in the show that I think that's ever happened. And, you know, contrary to the stereotype of women as emotional, we see Janeway constantly having to rein in the emotional outbursts of the men around her.
So true, dude. So fucking true. Yes. I don't want to cut you off, but you're absolutely right.
Well, this is a fact, is that men have been the emotional ones the entire time. People might think that, you know, women, they burst into tears or whatever when the going gets tough, but it turns out that's wrong. Men are the ones who are more likely to fall apart under pressure. They might be cool for the moment when something's happening, but then they go home and they punch holes in the drywall or they beat their wives and their kids, you know? So, you know, who would you rather have in command? A dude who commits violence when he's angry, or a woman like Janeway or this Amy Bauernschmidt? I mean, I think it's a win.
Absolutely, man. And I'm funny enough also watching Star Trek Voyager right now, so I totally identify with what you're saying. Like, it just coincidentally, we happen to be watching this series at the same time. We didn't plan that, everybody out there.
No.
We just happened to be watching at the same time. But yes, it really, and I didn't actually think about this until I read, until you brought this up about this connection, because between Janeway and why it's so important, and like you say, she toes that, or not toes the line, but walks that line so well between, like, you know, stereotypical, you know, or just retaining femininity and not coming off as like a bitch or a like whatever, you know, all that kind of bullshit, right? The fact that women have to do that in the first place is fucking bullshit. But the women that do it and are able to do that and do it masterfully, right? And I know I see these women in my own life, right? It happens to be that I work at a company that is most of the women, at least 50%, probably more of the women in powerful positions, people in powerful positions are women. And towing that line is tough, but the respect that I have for those women, and I agree, I wish that more men would study Janeway and really try to understand her.
Think about it this way. Okay. I mean, when men are constantly, you know, they call people pussies. They are just constantly bagging on women. And if you think about women, all you have to do is recognize the tolerance they have for pain.
Oh, God.
How many men could survive giving birth? You know, if I get a bad cramp, I can barely stand it for 10 minutes. I'm running around just like, you know, women can spend many hours or even days in hard labor giving birth. They tolerate a level of pain that would crush almost any man. And so I just can't understand how this whole idea ever got started. It's mind-boggling. I mean, and sexual harassment, right? Okay. In Voyager, there's none. There is no sexual harassment. And
ever.
It's not because it's the 24th century. It's because Janeway has such a presence of authority that not a single person on the crew would dare cross that line.
I mean, you know, oh man, I'll find myself like looking at Captain Janeway like, wow, she's a really, you know, she's very attractive because she's powerful. She's an attractive woman physically, but also like there's something very attractive about her in that role, right? But I also simultaneously think to myself, just like, in my mind, I'm like, I would just never say anything. Like, she's so like badass, like you're just like, no, sexual harassment. Yeah, fucking, not that I would sexually harass anybody, but it's certainly not fucking Kathryn Janeway.
And the point is that sexual harassment in the workplace, ultimately, it has its origins in female disempowerment. And
right.
So you would not grab the ass of anybody you respected. And this is what guys need to understand, is that this is, you wouldn't make sexual jokes to someone you respected. So
exactly.
And we see actually this play out in contrast. It's really powerful in the story between the respect with which Janeway is treated by her crew versus her conflict with this more primitive male-dominated species, the Kazon.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, the leader of a Kazon faction slaps Janeway across the face. And the brutality of that, when you see, like, after, this is somebody who's so respected and he just slaps her, it's shocking. It was just shocking.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, it's like you said, it's amazing that was 25 years ago. And it's still an outstanding show. Everybody should watch it. And, like I said, and I'll close out this section here, right? From my perspective, this Captain Bauernschmidt's elevation mattered for the same reason we talked about Dory Miller way back earlier. We talked about and why Barack Obama matters. It's important, not just what they like. It's not just sort of what they are and what they do, but like what they represent and the future that they represent and the progress that they represent. It's super fucking important, and so I think it's important that we hit that up. We're speeding through this. I want to talk about our guest. I think probably makes the most sense. Although, Sean, you want to mention something quickly about SpaceX?
Oh God, SpaceX. I mean, this is, with all the terrible news going on this week, this SpaceX.
Need some good news.
This is, the Bauernschmidt, think about how that is for a young girl right now when she sees an aircraft carrier being captained by a woman. And we've got a female vice president about to be inaugurated. It matters. It matters. Absolutely does. And so, but no, the SpaceX thing is really great because, I have been waiting for months to see this thing get off the ground, and it did. And
yes,
it didn't land, but the point was this was a spectacular launch, and it was a completely new kind of rocket, completely new rocket engines that had never really flown before. We're talking about a completely new method of rocketry where the rocket aerodynamically flies back to Earth. It's something along the lines of what the space shuttle did, but it's not the space shuttle. It's just it's a dumb rocket, right? It's just a booster, and so it doesn't have a pilot, and it's automatically able to guide itself right back. It landed right directly on the pad, and they just had a slight failure, and this is the first time it ever flew, right? And it made it did its whole aerodynamic thing. It made its transition maneuver. And then as it's coming down to the pad, they couldn't get enough fuel to the engine. And so it blew up. But man, that was a triumph. It's probably one of the most exciting things that I've ever seen in my life in terms of the aerospace industry.
Right. Yeah. And look, we have to celebrate positive things where we can get it. And also it's funny that we're talking about Captain Janeway and starships and, and here we are at the sort of the infant stage of that, right? The infant stage of that with, but it's a big fucking deal. It's a big fucking deal. And again, we need good news where we can fucking find it,
Well, it turns out that if we're ever going to become a warp capable civilization or even get to a point of just being able to do interplanetary travel, we have to take care of our weak and vulnerable. They're not separated. We have to,
That's right.
We have to flatten our hierarchy, and we have to take care of our weak and vulnerable, or we won't make it as a civilization. So we've got this promise and this peril going on at the same time. And it's a crazy time to be alive.
It really, really is. And with that, I want to move on to our guest segment. We're pleased to welcome back our friend and friend of the show, Joe Occhipinti. Joe Occhipinti is a graduate of McGill University. He has a degree in human geography. As a geographer, he focuses on spatial patterns and dynamics. He's also a professor. He's a writer, a nature blogger, and considers himself an explorer of places and ideas. He has been working to educate others both in the classroom and on social media about climate change for years, and more recently, the emerging threat of COVID-19. And by emerging, we mean here. So without further delay, we bring you Joseph Occhipinti. Hey, Joe, welcome back to the show. We love talking to you wherever it is, whether it be on social media, whether it be here. We really count on folks like you and Dan Teeter and Patricia Nolan Stein to, as sort of early adopters of the program. So you are why this works. So thanks for being here, man. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I love doing the show with you guys. I've learned so much from you both, watching your shows, interacting with you on Facebook, and it's a pleasure. I'm glad I'm here.
Awesome, dude. So tell us about your shirt.
All right. Well, okay. Let me see if I can get this on frame here.
Oh, a nice one.
It's the mirror episode in the original Star Trek. And this shirt is like 25 years old. It's nothing. I've owned it forever, but I thought it was appropriate because I think what I'm going to try to do anyway, this is an emotional subject for me. But I want to be rational, and there's nobody that reminds me more of that than either Spock's, whether it's in the real universe or the alternative one, right? They're both rational, right? But the other thing is that sometimes I feel like sometime in 2015, I stepped into another universe. I feel that way because so much that has happened. I think we've grown a bit numb to it and normalized the fantastic, unethical dysfunction that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. We've just normalized it to some extent. But when you step back and you think about what's happened, it's like, wow. We can talk. Obviously, we'll talk some about that. But anyway, that's the shirt.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, first of all, obviously, Sean and I are huge Star Trek fans. And
huge.
Huge.
You saw my shirt earlier, and we talked about Star Trek earlier, and it's like it really is something. And particularly when you go back to those episodes, and it really reminds me of that normal time before that you're talking about, where we could sort of, it's almost like the future has been hijacked. That's what I feel sometimes.
Yeah. I keep picturing Obi-Wan Kenobi in my mind saying a more civilized age, like remember that scene from Star Wars?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Disney's coming out with like 9 shows. You've heard that?
From Star Wars?
Yeah, 9 new
Wow.
9.
Wow. The Mandalorian's pretty good. And I think the first season was really, really good. The second season is not as good, but I like that theme. I like that universe. It's really contrary in a lot of ways to why so different than Star Trek. And the Star Trek vision and the values is like what I love about it. But that I didn't know they were coming out with 9 more shows. That's wild.
I know. It is wild. They got the money, right?
Yeah.
65% of the total market share of entertainment in the United States or something like that.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Amazing.
86 million subscribers now to Disney Plus. So
wow.
That's a pretty good fan base.
Yeah. You can basically do whatever the hell you want at that point. It's interesting. We were talking earlier in the show during the news segment, we were talking about corporate power. And boy, when you are monopolizing that much of a market, we could do a whole show on corporate monopolies and the problems with that, but Jesus Christ.
Certainly could.
So anyway, well, thanks and for coming back on the show, Joe. Obviously, we are just happy to have you. Let's just dive into the main conversation for today, which is about the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll just state a couple horrible facts. COVID-19 is killing something like 3,000 people a day in the United States, which is, right, we talk about this kind of a 9/11 per day, insane. The United States is witnessing unprecedented surge in case numbers. The unemployment rate's at 7%, which is doesn't really show, real real unemployment numbers, right? That is just sort of a general number, but still. And 54 million people in America right now are facing food insecurity. People are literally going hungry in the richest country in the world. Vaccine is on the horizon, as we know, but it's in a very distant horizon for most Americans, not to mention the rest of the planet. And of course, let's not forget that Australia has got this thing basically sewn up, right? They've reopened in-person movie theater and live theater performances on the other side of the planet. So, Joe, I want to give you the opportunity to sort of frame this discussion for us in the first instance, with all the caveats that you are not a virologist, et cetera. I get that. But from your perspective, what should our listeners, what should Sean and I, what should we all know about the COVID-19 pandemic at this point?
All right. Well, I'm a geographer and I look at patterns and I look at indices and I look at the data to try to figure out what's going on in a larger sense. And I've been doing that with COVID since the beginning. And it's the biggest thing to know, just as an individual, as a person who has to protect themselves and their family, is that you got to hunker down for another number of months, because it's going to be a while before the vaccine kicks in. And the other thing in terms of our society is I think we all need to try to convey a sense of responsibility to our fellow citizens to think about the common good. And that relates to wearing masks, to taking the vaccine, to doing social distancing measures, to doing what's right, for the public, for ourselves. Those are the two main things, I think. I mean, for me, this pandemic has become more personal because now I have family members, close family members that are very likely infected, and some of them are vulnerable. So, like I said, I'm going to try to be more like Spock and try to think about this rationally, but it's a very personal, topic for a lot of us. And more, I mean, Sean and I were talking earlier, we're hearing about friends and families and colleagues and so forth having to deal with this directly because it's become so prevalent in our society. And I do think it's going to continue to rise. We're not at the crest yet. I was looking, actually, one of the interesting things, like I said, I look for patterns, and I like to have in terms of projections and seeing what's coming, you want to look for things that are more sort of forward-looking. And one of the most forward-looking things I've seen is this new ability for scientists to examine wastewater and look for viral particles in the wastewater. And that tends to be a leading indicator that's over a week before we actually see the cases.
Mm-hmm.
So,
wow.
And that's been going on since the early part of the pandemic. I was hearing about that. They were doing that testing at universities and places where they have kind of contained wastewater systems where they're able to isolate smaller groups because it doesn't really work in a big city. But certainly,
actually, they're doing some really interesting work in Boston with it.
Really,
they're doing some work in the Boston Harbor area where they're looking at large scale emissions, right, of this virus particle. You should look into it. It's really interesting. And eventually what we'll do is we'll build enough of a database to be able to make predictions that are fairly accurate with that. It's really an exciting prospect because think about even past this pandemic, if you could have systems that are early warning systems anywhere to tell us if something's happening, some kind of a viral, even chemical, or it has many applications. Anyway, what that's telling us, the Boston data is telling us that it's been spiking quite dramatically the last few days. And so we should be seeing in a week or so a significant increase in cases in the Boston area. And so we have not seen the peak yet, I don't think, in most places. In some places we have, but in most places in the United States, I don't think we have. And the other interesting thing, I was reading an article in the Washington Post about making predictions about what's coming. And another way to look at it, there's been this fairly consistent ratio of cases per deaths with about a 26-day lag. So after about 26 days, the cases will translate to a 1.8% of deaths. So, for example, if you had 100,000 cases 26 days ago, you should be seeing 1,800 deaths, or 1.8% of 100,000 today. So now we are, and that ratio has stayed fairly consistently across the entire pandemic so far. So think about it. We have 200,000 to 250,000 cases a day now. I think what yesterday was 245,000. I think the 7-day average is something around 215,000 cases. That translates to close to 4,000 cases, 3,800 cases, right?
Or deaths per day.
Excuse me, deaths. Coming up, right? 26 days from now.
Right.
So we're ramping up to approaching 4,000 deaths per day. And then after that, this ratio could actually be altered by the fact that hospitalizations are reaching a maximum. People will be getting worse care. And so more people will end up, the case fatality rate would increase in that situation, that scenario. And I just read somewhere that I think 1 out of 8 Americans now lives in a jurisdiction where their hospitals is either capacity or very, very close to capacity. So it's not a small number.
Which doesn't just affect COVID. I mean, that means don't get sick, don't get hurt, don't even have to go to the emergency room, right? Because they're going to triage you right out if you're not, dying.
I heard that's a really great point, Sean. And I heard this reading earlier this week, in a similar sort of vein to what you're talking about, Joe, and to what you're talking about, Sean. And that is, right, they're sending people home with COVID-19 they wouldn't have sent home in April and May, right? They have to, right? Because the numbers are so much higher than they were then. So now the threshold for when you get hospital care has gone up. So people are going home, like you said, Joe, and getting worse care naturally, right? And that is a huge problem. And we'll see that spike. I imagine that will also contribute to that spike of deaths.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it would change the ratio. It would make it higher, right?
Right.
So not only that, the other phenomenon that happens is people get spooked and don't even want to go to the hospital.
I don't. Right. I mean, I've canceled doctor's appointments because, if it's non-essential, why would I bother to go and expose myself?
Same.
That's rational.
The last place I want to be right now is a doctor's office where everyone is sick, right? Like that's the last place I want to be. And so, like you say, Sean, I can, like, this is a silly example, and frankly, I'm fortunate enough to be able to go to the dentist, but I have really thin enamel on my teeth. I really have to keep on top of no matter how. And my point is that I haven't been to the doctor in almost a year, to the dentist in almost a year, and I normally would have gone probably 4 times by now, right? And my point is that, like, it's like preventative care has gone out the window. It's gone out the fucking window because it's just not worth it. The risk is not worth it to me to like schlep into New York City of all places. New York City? I'm not going to New York fucking City unless I absolutely have to.
Indoor setting in the doctor's office. I mean,
nightmare scenario. And
by the way, too, I mean, the dental care actually is whole health care. I mean, it's related.
It is, right? It's all connected.
To show that good dental care keeps you healthy overall.
Yeah, there's apparently some linkage between if you've got abscesses or a lot of bacterial infections, it can actually go to your heart. That's it's insane. I mean, like, you really got to keep on top of it.
I know somebody who almost died very recently. A family member, they had an infection in the molar, and it spread into their face, and had to go up into their brain, and had to go to the ICU and spend a couple of nights in the ICU to treat the infection. He would have died.
And this is from a
toothache.
Yeah, from a toothache. And this is right. And dental care, as we know, right, we could get into a whole conversation here about the failures of the healthcare system, right? Because I am now living the life of somebody, because I mean, I have been without insurance for a huge chunks of my life, and I wouldn't go to the dentist for just a little toothache. It would basically have to be unbearable pain for me to go then to the emergency room. So my point is that, like, if you don't have health care, right, or you don't have access to dental care, especially, which is incredibly expensive and rare to have it, right? You go and you're like, well, I'll put it off. And next thing you know, you're having a fucking heart attack, right?
Yeah. Right. Well, there's a reason why the United States is like 35 in the world in like longevity. I mean, life expectancy.
Right.
Well, this this is what we saw. We've seen this clash that's occurred between the idea that we should provide humanitarian care to everyone, and on the other hand, the desire to make money. And so it really has become your money or your life. And this is something that we all talk about every time the healthcare debate comes up, because it's penny wise, pound foolish. I mean, we can save X number of thousands of lives every year and X number of billions of dollars by going to a public healthcare program and cutting out the private middleman. And we're not doing it because of the private middleman and their lobbyists and their constituency. And again, we talked about this in our first news segment about, the incredible malfeasance in terms of allowing corporations to get away with murder in this country and slavery and everything else like that.
It's normalized. You have to actually break through that to get people to understand what's happening. They don't see it. You don't see that systemic injustice.
It's because of the lag. It's because of the time lag. I mean, like, you got 26 days between, COVID cases and COVID deaths, but you have maybe 26 years between the depriving of a person of health insurance and their ultimate death from preventable causes.
Right. That's a really great point. I want to shepherd us on to the next question or topic for discussion anyway. And that is that, and so recent polls are showing that somewhere between 47 and 63% of Americans are willing to take the vaccine. We know that we need to get to about 70% of Americans. We need 70% of Americans to receive the vaccine in order to achieve herd immunity. So I think there's a lot to unpack here, but why in both of you, or both, this is a question for everybody, right? So why should we not, as Americans, worry about taking the vaccine? And why do we think, the three of us, why do we think that Americans, what is the kind of reasoning that got us to this place where people are not willing to sort of deal with this reality?
Yeah, that's a big question. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about the vaccine first. I mean, I think we should maybe set the stage for this by talking about the vaccines. Now, there's three of them, right? There's the Astra Zeneca one, there's the Moderna, and then the Pfizer one, right? Did I say that right? Pfizer?
I think you're right. I think, Pfizer. Yeah, you got it.
Pfizer.
Right. Pfizer.
So the first two, the Pfizer and the Moderna, are mRNA vaccines. The AstraZeneca is a DNA vaccine. And there's differences between them that I think people need to know. And I think the AstraZeneca is going to end up being the big one for the world for a number of reasons. First of all, AstraZeneca is actually has committed to not making any profit from that vaccine, unlike the other two.
That is astonishing. Wow.
And so the vaccine
that's like Salk. That's like Salk.
It's incredible. It's awesome. But that means that, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine are going to be $20 a shot, whereas the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be $3 or $4 a shot, which is a huge difference, especially for
in the developing world.
The other great thing about the AstraZeneca vaccine is you can put it in the refrigerator. So you don't need a whole infrastructure you don't have to create an infrastructure to deliver it. It's already there. Pretty much everyone's got refrigerators.
This has really puzzled me. Why the hell do they have to keep this vaccine so cold?
The mRNA vaccine is based on a sort of a artificially created piece of protein that's folded and shaped. And it's really actually amazing to look at how they do this. I mean, think about it. They have to mimic the geometry of a very, very tiny microscopic piece of matter.
Yay, science.
Yeah.
Right?
Fucking love science.
And the only way we can do this is because of a lot of development that's been funded by the government in basic natural research, right? Natural sciences, basic sciences. I mean, you need very, very sophisticated electron microscopes. I mean, you see these things, they're the size of a room. They've got refrigeration. They have their own platforms. It minimizes like vibrations. It's just incredibly sophisticated equipment. And then you need supercomputers to take the images and turn them into 3D forms. And then you take that and you create this, this piece of protein that mimics the spike proteins in the virus. And it's very fragile and it's floppy. right? So they have to actually figure out ways of making it more rigid, but they can only go so far. So then what they have to do is they have to encapsulate it in a bubble of fat and then freeze that fat so it doesn't change shape. Because it's the geometry itself that's the key in the lock in the cell that will do the work.
You reminded me of something, and that is that I have participated for about 15 years in a distributed computing initiative that's run by IBM. And basically what it does is that whenever your computer's sitting there, which it is probably most of the day when you're not working on it, it is computing things like protein folding for combating viruses. And they have one for HIV. They have a whole bunch of dengue fever. They have the Zika project. They have all, and it all involves this protein folding that you're talking about, and computing the geometry of it. And so they're literally taking your computer and having it try to match the shape of this thing. So now that you mentioned that that's what's going on with COVID, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, for the mRNA vaccine. So what happens is then once they have this artificial strand of mRNA encapsulated in a fat bubble, right? Then you can thaw it, and you have to give it right away. I think you have to give it within 6 hours or something, or it's no good. So there are all these limits to time limits to this. Anyway, then that goes into the body and goes into the cells, and the cells itself will take that information, because mRNA, what it is actually a messenger to tell the cells to create certain proteins. That's literally what's the function of it is. And normally the DNA creates mRNA, which then in turn goes into the manufacturing sites of the cell, right? And then that they start to churn out these proteins, whatever they may be, hormones, whatever. In this case, it's something that mimics the spike protein. And so then it gets released into the bloodstream, gets done, and the immune system picks up on it, sees this foreign object, and begins to create an immune response to it. And since the foreign object is benign, it doesn't really hurt anybody, the immune system has time to do this, right? So after about 10 days or so, you start to have a pretty healthy immune response. And then they give you another dose in 3 weeks, and your immune response gets even better, right? Gets much stronger. I think the data so far shows that after the first shot, 10 days later, you're about 50 something percent protected. And then after the second shot, you're about 95% protected, which is an incredible, figure. But if you get instead infected by the virus itself, you don't have time to do that. Your body does not have those 10 days. And also Sean was making a point about how the virus itself somehow suppresses the immune functions.
Yeah, what I read is that basically once the virus enters the cell, one of the first things it does, cells normally signal other cells when they're in trouble, when they're under attack. And then one of the first things that COVID does when it goes inside the cell is it turns off that signaling system, so they can't call for help. So maybe there's other parts of the immune system that can still mount a slight response, but it's too little too late, because normally there's the early warning system, and that COVID is designed or evolved, I guess, to shut that system down, which is why it's so deadly.
Yeah, I mean, it mimics AIDS in that regard, because, that's what AIDS did, is it attacked the T cells directly. And so we still don't have, 40 years later, we still don't have a vaccine for that one.
Right.
Yeah, this is a miracle. This is really, it really is.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle of science. A miracle of modern science. It's one of the greatest
scientific achievements of the 21st century.
I think that's right. I mean, it has to be. It has to be.
Yeah.
And yet there's still this time delay. So you say it takes 3 weeks to build up your immunity. So that means if everybody got a shot today, we'd still be seeing cases rising until the end of the year, and then we'd still see deaths till the end of January. So that would be if everybody got the shot today.
If like most people all of a sudden. So we've got months of this still.
And I was just looking at I'm not high risk. I'm not in a essential profession. I stay at home, and I'm also not that old. Although I'm getting there, but I'm not in the high risk age group, and I don't have any comorbidities. So, I'm probably not going to get the vaccine till May or June.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Same. So basically it's going to be continuation of this, for the foreseeable future,
So we could see things begin to drop off. Maybe starting in February, March, we could start to see a decrease in some of the case numbers.
I think so. Yeah, I think by February, March, we'll see that the numbers reflect a decrease for sure. There'll be benefits before then, but they'll be small, so we won't be able to really detect them very easily. But before we get to that, I mean, let me finish off with the vaccines. A few more things I wanted to kind of
go for it, please.
So the big thing, which is an unknown, is how quickly these mRNA vaccines can be manufactured on a mass scale. I mean, remember there were promises back a month or two ago of 300 million doses by the end of the year. We're not even come close to that.
Right.
Close to that. Hospitals have had to, all over the country, have had to scramble to figure out. They were promised 30,000 vaccines and they're getting like 1,000, a lot of places, it's a lot less than they were expecting. So now you have to think about, well, who's going to get these, right? And the government put out guidelines. The FDA, the CDC put out guidelines as it should be direct first responders, ICU, nurses and so forth. Also people working in nursing home staff, and also nursing home patients are the ones that are going to get this first, but there's not enough. So decisions have to be made. And so there's a whole bunch of ethical quagmires that can arise here. Another one is, do you vaccinate the people who volunteered for the tests who received saline solutions instead, right? Placebos. You should for their sake, but for the sake of data, you shouldn't. You should keep them the same so we can collect more data from these individuals. So what do you do?
Interestingly enough, they did volunteer for this trial, and they were told that they could get a placebo. So, if you're saying that they did this for the sake of science and humanity, then they really don't have a right to demand that they get the vaccine.
And I'm sure most wouldn't.
Right.
The other difference, by the way, between the two classes of vaccines is that in the trials for the Astra Zeneca, they actually tested all the trial recipients and measured their viral loads. They did not do that with the other two vaccines. What they did was they waited until people were sick, right? So with the AstraZeneca vaccine, we know that one does actually stop infection spread. With the other two, we assume that they do, but we don't absolutely know that. And the other thing that was different about the AstraZeneca trial was that they used a meningitis vaccine for the placebo side. They did not use a saline solution. So the people, so the people who got the placebo actually could get symptoms. They could get side effects. They wanted to make it as equal as possible to the people who are getting the vaccine. And with the Pfizer and the Moderna, they just use saline. So, that doesn't mean they're not effective. It's still, it's still a miracle, a scientific miracle, what they've done, honestly.
You might want to elaborate for our listeners just why they do the controlled in trials, because I don't think a lot of people understand the concept of experimental controls.
Well, it comes down to just minimizing bias, because there's a lot of unconscious bias that happens otherwise in the researchers and also the participants. And so if the participants and the researchers don't know who's getting what, that really reduces, and that's what makes for a good study.
Double blind, right?
Studies, or even single blind studies, sometimes when you can't do double blind ones, are much, much better. Really
gets into the ethics of science in general, in the sense that so much about science is taking the human element out of the equation and getting rid of our these. That's what but it's not just something from a TV show. It's real. This is a real thing that creeps into any science. Is when you want to find a result, your confirmation bias will fool you. And so you have to have that control there so that you are not fooled.
Another interesting point here, and because the analogy sort of is, it's an analogy that goes outside of science, right? And this is why scientific thinking, and this is, I think, part of the themes of the show today is bad reasoning, right? And the reason why science is so important, why those double-blind studies and those controls are so important, is because they help eliminate the, like you're talking about, the inherent reasoning bias that's part of being a human being. And we see that a lack of understanding of that we are, as human beings, inherently biased is what causes a lot of the problems we see across society, right? I mean, in the law, right? And the law is the huge one, right? Like, there's a reason why Black people get stricter sentences than white people do for the exact same crime, right? And that is because of the inherent bias, certainly in juries, but even in judges whose entire job is to be impartial, right? It's also why term limits, lifetime appointments for judges matter, because that's another form of control, right? They can't their bias can be a little bit controlled. And we can have a debate about whether or not lifetime appointments are a good idea, but that's the idea behind that.
They're not subject to retribution.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point, Christoph. I mean, there's certainly definitely parallels there. And again, any kind of institutions of knowledge, whether it's the criminal justice or science and education or academia, science, all of that requires these rigors, right? They really do, because we know from thousands of years of exploring the human condition that they're necessary. Right?
Yes.
Even if you're somebody who really, really wants to help, like you want to cure cancer or cure COVID, and you're single focused on that singular focus is an admirable attitude, but that can also lead you astray to want to seize on positive results that aren't really as positive as you think they are.
Right. And of course, the other safety mechanism that's really, really critical to science is the peer review process. Right? That's one of the reasons why I think some people are a little concerned about these vaccines, is because that hasn't happened to the extent that it usually does, right?
Just because of time, right?
Lack of time. So what they had to do to create a vaccine in a year was to overlap all the steps. So normally they do it sequentially, right? One step after the other, but they did a lot of the steps concurrently in getting to this point. But the good news is they did all the steps. They just did them concurrently. And the only thing that's really missing is the long-term data. Other than that, honestly, they were very rigorous about trying to keep the scientific, integrity to this vaccine. And I actually, after doing a little bit of research to get ready for this show, I feel actually better about the vaccine than I did before I started doing the research. I feel like it's definitely something I would do without a question. I would take it.
Well, the very interesting part about this vaccine is that normally you've got killed virus in vaccines. This has none. It's just proteins, right? So that in and of itself just makes it way safer than other types of vaccines that you would get, even for whether it's smallpox or yellow fever or cholera or all those, or even the childhood vaccinations have killed virus, right?
Yeah, well, that's true of the two mRNA vaccines. They don't use, but the Astra Zeneca uses an adenovirus that usually inflicts chimpanzees.
Oh,
but it's not COVID, though, right? It's not
COVID. Not COVID. No, it's not COVID at all. It's a completely different class of viruses. It's an it's like a cold virus, right? And it causes, but it doesn't. It's not in the human population.
Right.
What they did was they took this virus, they changed the DNA. They cut out parts of the DNA that would spread the virus and make it infectious, and they added parts of DNA that actually creates the spike protein. And so they genetically engineered this the DNA in the virus, and then what happens is when it goes into the human body, the parts that they engineer then will create an mRNA, just like the mRNA viruses, and then the process is exactly the same after that. So it's an extra step to it, but it is not a virus that would in and of itself pose any dangers to humans at all.
To my way of thinking, this sounds like an extremely safe vaccine. Like nobody should have any problem. Now they do say there's some side effects, like you get some real symptoms with this vaccine that may scare some people.
Well, I was looking at that, and about 1/3 to 50% of people for the mRNA vaccines get some form of side effect, and about 15% get side effects that are considered a little more severe, but not life-threatening. Right?
Okay.
Things that will last a number of days rather than just a day that you get the vaccine, right? So it's about 15%. So people need to know that, because you don't want people to start getting these symptoms and say, oh my God, this isn't supposed to happen.
Right.
For a fair number of people, they're going to be sick for a number of days from this, like they have the flu, something like that.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's nothing compared to not being able to
right.
breathe and drowning in your own fluid, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Cost benefit, right?
Absolutely. And so wait, am I correct? Did you just say 15% on the high end? Is that of people who will get these sort of symptoms? Is that what you're saying? I just wanted to clarify.
So, out of everyone who gets a vaccine so far, about 15% have shown side effects that are a little bit more significant than just, pain in the location, feeling weak that day. They last for a number of days.
I see. And those numbers are good, though. I mean, that's not bad, right? I mean, that's 85%, right? I mean, like, look, right? I mean, I'll take those odds. And by the way, I won't die also, which is great, which is also great. We talk about, and this is something that I think I always joke on the show that when I go on to Instagram, I follow meme accounts. And the thing about meme accounts is that it gets you out of your bubble, right? Because everybody looks at memes ranging from like Nazis to peace and love liberals. Like everybody looks at memes, right? So on Instagram, that means that the comment sections are always a hotbed of terrible ideas. And what I've noticed is, first of all the Trump 2020s are all gone, which makes me so happy. Also, what's gone is the complete deniers, the plandemic people are all gone. Like you don't hear any of that anymore.
That's good to hear.
And I think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier today, is that everyone now knows somebody who's gotten sick, right? It's permeated the entire society. There's no alcove of the United States anymore that's safe, right? Where was I going with this? I guess my point generally is that, I hear people talking about how they won't take the vaccine and for whatever reason, because they don't want to get sick, they don't want to get ill. But again, I'm glad to hear that the numbers of people who will get the sort of bad symptoms from the vaccine are relatively low, because hopefully that'll help people be willing, even those Instagram idiots, be willing to take the vaccine when they see that most people aren't actually even getting serious symptoms at all.
Honestly, I mean, we could not have had better results with this vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I mean, 95% efficacy is just out of this world incredible. And the fact that no one's really gotten very seriously sick from it, incredible.
There's something with anaphylactic shock. What do you know about that?
That's always a concern. There were I think it was the Astra Zeneca trial, 2 people ended up having severe allergic reactions. I think maybe that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
But both of those people had known severe allergic reactions to other things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so what this means is, if we learn this, is okay, fine. Anybody who has the potential of having an allergic reaction, we can give them the virus in a controlled setting.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So if they have an allergic reaction, we know how to deal with it. You deal with it very quickly, and it's easy and it's safe. Right? That's what it's all about. That we want to know the truth about the side effects so we can mitigate them. Right? That's really what it's about.
I just want to point out, though, that even though we know, we can sit here in our scientific bubble and say, okay, this is safe, this is great. But other people will splash these lurid headlines and these memes about the reactions and the side effects, and use that as proof as to how this is a terrible vaccine and you shouldn't get it. And it's the very same facts will be used to discourage people from taking the vaccine.
We're all worried about that, right? All 3 of us.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens is there's normal death rate anyway. There's normal sickness anyway in any population. So how do you distinguish between what's being caused by the vaccine and what's being caused by the, just normal, You give the vaccine out to 10,000 people, X number of them are going to die anyway. They would have died anyway. So it would be very easy for people to paint that as a result of the vaccine, cause and effect kind of thing, when it's not. And how do you absolutely prove that it's not? You really can't, right?
Can't prove a negative ever. And this is as people try to put things, any conspiracy, the proof is always, the burden of proof is shifted, and the fact that you can't prove a negative is used as evidence of the fact that you're trying to disprove. You know, it's just like
absolutely
insane.
Absolutely.
There will be cases where there'll be questions about, especially with the frail population of, nursing home people. I mean, they have very high death rates anyway, and they're very sick individuals, most of them. And so, and the vaccines may cause symptoms that combine with pre-existing comorbidities that some of those people might die or get very, very sick. It could happen. And that's an acceptable risk at this point, considering how deadly this virus is to that population.
It has to be.
It has to be. What's the answer? No, don't vaccinate people. Like that's the question you ask people like this. We should be asking people like this, Sean, even though people like the three of us are not going to be talking to these people usually, just because, first of all, you don't want to lose your fucking mind, but also just because we probably don't have a lot of these folks in our lives by choice. But look, I mean, it's like, what do you say to somebody like that? I lost my train of thought. You know how I do this all the time.
Well, you say basically you've got one option, which is let COVID just mow down the entire population of a nursing home. You know, just like coming in there with a machine gun, just mow them down.
Kill everybody.
And the staff too. I mean, it's just like they're having like,
and then there's staff's families, right? And then on and on and on.
There's 1.7 million nursing home patients in the United States, and they comprise something like 44% of all the deaths in the country. I mean, it's a huge vulnerable percentage of people here.
I'll tell you what, if I had a parent in a nursing home, I would pull them out. I would have pulled them out months ago.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's rampant in nursing homes right now. They tried to protect and keep them, but it didn't work. It's getting in through the staff. You're paying these people minimum wage and expecting them to do these heroic things that take a lot of knowledge and resources. And I don't blame the workers, right? They're trying to do their best, but they're not given the resources to do it. We should have been pouring money into this, and we didn't.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. That is such a great point, because it's a failure of leadership that why we're here, right? I mean, the reason why we have those kind of numbers of people dying in nursing homes, and also, by the way, folks that are working for minimum wage, going into nursing homes, doing, like you said, really, really hard and very, very necessary work. They're not getting paid enough. There's so many cases, by the way, and the reason why I'm just triggered a thought. Your comment triggered a thought, because I read a lot of cases in my job, and a lot of class action lawsuits. And there are class action lawsuits coming out of nursing groups of nursing home workers, because they are just so grossly underpaid, robbed blind all the time. Frequently immigrants, frequently people of color, right? And those are the exact same populations who are at higher risk for COVID-19. And it's just like, and it's just like, wow. What a mess. This
is what we talked about with this whole liability shield bullshit that we talked about in the first part of the show. It's horrible.
Horrible. It's disgusting.
And these are big companies that run these places.
That's absolutely right. That is absolutely right. Just like it's just like, right, the entire hospital system has become, there are no independent hospitals, right? There are now basically conglomerates and the same thing with the nursing homes and everything else. And just like they are trying to, they cut their prices, they cut their expenses. And personnel is where you cut your expenses first. And so, and you're going to get some people who are willing to do it, right? Always some people, and they're going to be the brown people. They're going to be the immigrants. They're going to be the underprivileged. That's who's going to go in and do it. And we talked about earlier in the show, these corporate liability shields are, I mean, they are immoral. They're just despicable, absolutely despicable that we're even having conversations like this.
Right. And actually, to go back to the vaccine, the people of color and people in the working sort of entry-level jobs and minimum wage jobs and so forth, there's a lot of push to try to get them vaccinated first.
Mm-hmm.
in the general population, and they should be, because they're much more vulnerable and exposed. They don't have the luxury of protecting themselves like middle class white people do, like me, right?
Well,
They don't, or middle class people of any
exactly.
but,
That's exactly right.
you know.
if you're working a minimum wage job, chances are you got a whole bunch of roommates, and that amps up your chances of getting it. And any one of those people goes out to a bar, any one of those people doesn't, keep themselves completely safe, you're in trouble. And then
when you're falling behind the bills and you can't afford to take a sick day,
exactly, you'll get fired. You'll get fired if you take a sick day.
Or at the very least, you won't get paid for it. Most of them don't have sick time.
Exactly.
You can't afford it.
You can't afford it. And by the way, we are dealing with a situation now where there is a glut of workers. So companies have, you don't want to come to work?
Right.
Peace. See ya. Well, we got 1 million people ready who will be happy to take your job because they are literally don't have any fucking food, right? There are no jobs out there.
You don't have food. You're out in the streets. You can't afford the rent.
What are you going to do?
You go to work.
You go to work. What you do is you go to work, you mask up and you go to work, and you spin the odds. And, like you said, the three of us, we're very fortunate to be able to do our jobs from home. We're safe and protected. I kind of feel like, folks like us, we have an obligation then to stay home, right? Because right, and not go out, because people that are going to be out there. And this actually sort of goes into another question I wanted to ask you, actually. And that is, and maybe I should just read it. Do I have it here, or did I just? Oh yeah, here's the question. So from turning away, there's an idea flying out there that an individual deciding whether or not to, say, go out to eat at a restaurant under COVID-19 conditions should make that decision based on their own personal tolerance for risk. All three of us know why that's such a shitty way to look at it, for a lot of reasons. But is there a reason, as a matter of statistics, why that reasoning is flawed? In other words, well, maybe I'll just let you comment on that.
There's a lot of dimensions to this question. I mean, one of them obviously is the public good dimension, right? People should act according to the needs of their society, not just their own individual needs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is that, and you guys have talked about this a lot in this show. In terms of it has to be a full court press effort to deal with this pandemic. So whatever any of us can do in that regard is we should be doing, and that means minimizing our risks, right? Because when we minimize our risks, the level, the more people do that, the lower the baseline of spread is. It's that simple. And that baseline of spread is critical, because if it reaches a certain threshold, it goes nuclear, right?
Yeah.
It really starts to accelerate. So if you can keep it low enough, it's much more manageable. But as soon as you reach a certain level, so if people start to say, whatever, I can go to a restaurant, I'm sick of being at home, that don't have to do that, you're contributing to increasing the risk, right? For everyone, not just for yourself.
Yes, that's what I wanted that to think about and talk about that, because I know folks, like people that are in my life are like, it's like, it's risky, but I have a low tolerance. I have a high tolerance for risk. So, I'm probably not going to get sick. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I want. But like what I keep saying to folks like that is like, no, you don't understand how this works. The more people are out there, even if you don't get sick, as statistically speaking, you're increasing the risk overall, right? The more people that are out there, the more likely it is that someone will get sick. That's how it works.
I mean, how is it different in like thinking, I just had 3 or 4 drinks, but I really want to go to the store because I really want to get this. And I know it's a risk for me to do that, but I'm going to go out in my car, drive drunk anyway,
Honestly,
that's such a great analogy. It's exactly right.
Honestly, and I'd like to use the old saw about teaching algebra to a dog, but it's even worse than that, because dogs are actually pretty smart. And this is like trying to teach algebra to a fucking insect. Okay. Americans just they refuse to understand collective action problems. And I think part of it is our culture, because in Asian cultures and African, a lot of other cultures that have not been as capitalistic as we have. They have extended families. They see a community responsibility. We don't have that. We don't have that here. And as a matter of fact, people rail against it. And it just, it infuriates me because it's kind of like this. You're always going to have a certain group within a larger group that's going to comply, that's going to say, hey, I'm going to wear my mask to the grocery store because it's the right thing to do. But there's always going to be a segment that's not going to do it. They're not going to comply. And those people ruin it for the entire group, and expecting them to do it without having a penalty or a punishment. It's like pushing on a string. You can't do it without accountability.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I lived overseas. I've lived in developing countries, and there is a really different attitude about it. I remember one time I was flying in Bolivia, and a plane got delayed. It was broken, and normally in the United States, every single family or individual goes to the counter and
totally, absolutely.
That's not what happened. All the passengers got together, and they're like, "You're going to do us right." And we marched in as one group and demanded that they put us up in the hotel.
Oh, wow.
And as a group, we had a leader, and we had people working on it. And it was just like a union, it was just all this, an immediate spontaneous union formed to deal with this problem. Never happened in the United States. Never.
Never. That will never happen. Getting people to even.
And by the way, it worked.
It works, right? It turns out when people work together and to solve a problem, you are much better able to deal with powerful countervailing forces when you work together. That's why unions are important. That's why fucking voting is important. This is why the Electoral College is fucking criminal, right? Like all these problems. And like you said, Sean, and this is why we're unable to solve fucking climate change, right?
Climate change is the same thing.
It's the same fucking thing. It's the same fucking problem.
Now you have a situation where there was a point in the United States, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where public demonstrations were always covered by media, and they had got positive coverage and everything else like that. Now you actually have a counter-protest movement that is organized. And what that means is that anytime you get a bunch of people getting together to try to do the right thing, there's another group of people who are actually protesting you doing the right thing. And so you'll where before in a healthy society, you would have social pressure to do the right thing. Now you have social pressure in many places, especially in red states and red counties, to not do the right thing. And you're literally thought of as being there's being something wrong with you, something harmful about wanting to comply and do the right thing, because it puts the spotlight on the other people who are not complying. And they've actually now, those people, the sociopaths, have banded together and organized to prevent pro-social activity.
Yeah. And honestly, it's more insidious than that, because this was not just organized by sort of crazy people like in like militia guys. This was done at the think tank level back in the 70s. I remember when I was in undergrad in the 80s, and I was part of the Radical Student Union, and we were protesting against the CIA, the abuses in Central America and all that. It was a right-wing group of students that was funded by these think tanks that just constantly harassed us, and they were play testing the strategy back then. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan Haidt. This, I'm reminded of the conservative mind, which we talk about all the time on this show, because he talks about how the right-wing movements or conservative movements, they adopt the tactics of the left-wing movements, right? Because they're reactionary. And so what they've done is exactly that, right? They've now, we're talking about the counter protests, right? Right now there's one, I think today or tomorrow in Washington, right? Like that's like the mirror image, mirror episode, mirror image, mirror universe of, there's the shirt of the Pussy Hat March, right? And the Pussy Hat March was legitimate, right? Working for social change. This is just a temper tantrum, right? But it's an organized temper tantrum by these sorts, an organized temper tantrum.
Organized temper tantrum. That is so great. That I love that quote.
Maybe we'll have to pull that out for our memes next week.
they really took a lot from the grassroots strategies of the civil rights movement as well.
That's exactly right. That's
Saul
exactly
Alinsky.
right.
They all read the Saul Alinsky book, Rules for Radicals, and they follow that playbook. The left has forgotten about it, and the right is just they're reading it chapter and verse, and they're using it against us, and they're winning, and it's killing people. It's literally
power.
Yeah, it's an engine of genocide, really.
3,000 people a fucking day.
In a supposedly free society, we're conducting a 3,000 person a day genocide that has been essentially engineered at this point through malfeasance and counter protesting.
Yeah. So I've thought about this. I've thought, what would have happened, let's say, if Hillary Clinton had become president in 2016 and had continued with the pandemic response team that Obama had set up, and then met this crisis with science and reason and more of that, we still would have had a pandemic. Look what's happening in Europe and Germany, places like that. There still would have been a crisis. We still would have lost a lot of people, but not nearly this many. Not really. I mean,
we could have kept it under 100,000 probably. We could have kept it under 100,000 probably.
Very likely. Yeah. I mean, still would have been a major crisis. But I mean, we have, honestly, the real number of deaths right now is probably about 450,000.
It's insane.
If you look at the excess death data, right?
So that means it's almost certain to cross 1 million before this is over.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well. It could.
I mean, it's gonna approach it. I mean, it's right. I mean, because we're thinking about things in terms of exponential numbers here, right? I mean, it certainly could go that way. And by the way, and I think I know how you guys are going to answer this, but so a New York lawmaker has proposed mandating COVID vaccine if the COVID vaccine, if not enough people take it voluntarily. And there's also a question brewing among employers as to whether to impose mandatory vaccines on employees. I'll note that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has stated that employers can legally impose that vaccine requirement on their workforce, but with religious exemptions, which is a whole other fucking problem. But we won't go down that road. And I'll also note that this question when this question was broached months ago, employers were really not on board, but that's starting to change. So. And I'm also and I want to know what you guys think about that. I mean, I know based on our conversation that we probably think that we really can't expect people to do the right thing unless they're forced. There's always some number of people who are not going to do the right thing, right?
Here's the problem with this, okay? Again, it's the people who are on the side we can't force, the freedom people, are framing the discourse like, oh my God, this would be such a breach of American tradition. Bullshit, it's not. When I worked in healthcare, I was mandated to take vaccines. I had to, and of course, I would have had to leave the job, right? And that's been that way for decades. This is nothing new. This is
right.
A new idea.
I think that's how you do it. Rather than passing a law, you just say, "Hey, you want to go to a restaurant? You want to go to a concert? You want to go to a sports game? You want to go to school? You want your job? You have to show your vaccine certificate." And I can tell you right now that I've already read articles and I've seen tweets and posts about people saying that they're going to oppose that. And already there was something in the Supreme Court about somebody being kicked off an airplane for.
Oh yes, that's right. That was recently. Right?
So it's like I think the battle is going to shift from what used to be a matter of public enforcement to now they're going to try to fight private enforcement. And
that's really interesting because that will sort of really fly in the face of all the things that the right likes to talk about, right? Corporate we talked about it, but all of a sudden when it's the corporation, not the government, the corporation saying, if you want to work here, you have to have a vaccine. They're like, oh no, oh God, corporate power, blah, blah. Wait a second. I thought you wanted to drown government in a bathtub. I thought that was your whole fucking thing. Bottomless pit of bad fucking faith.
Yep.
They're so full of shit. I mean, one day it's states' rights, the next day it's federal government, the next day it's cities. They just pick whatever favors them in the moment. They are tap dancing hypocrites, and fuck them.
So you have to look at their agenda, and that's what they go for, right? They have an agenda, and they want to get that passed no matter what. It's not the tactics, right? They can talk all they want about principles, but it's really about
zero principles. zero. I mean, you remember, Ted Cruz? I saw Ted Cruz recently saying that he would be willing to go and argue in front of the Supreme Court about on behalf of Trump. He's right. He goes on Fox News and says this on Hannity, which and then you're like, and if you're on Hannity that Trump is definitely watching, right? So you basically are just talking directly to Trump, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I'll go and argue for you," and in front of the Supreme Court. And this is the guy the guy insulted his wife. He said his dad killed JFK. I mean, where are your principles, man? Where are your principles?
And Cruz is Mr. States' Rights anyway. Imagine if the other states got together and sued Texas. What Ted Cruz would be doing? He'd be on the other side of it.
Can you imagine? Come on.
Honestly, under the same principle, California could sue Texas for the Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely.
Right. The principle. And this is why we talked about this earlier in the show, but this is why the standing rules exist, right? Like, you can't sue on behalf of other people. The only way you can do that is in a class action. You can't just say like, someone sort of violated Sean Prophet's rights, but Christoph Defoe is going to bring the lawsuit. It doesn't fucking work that way. So you can't bring lawsuits. You can't bring lawsuits sort of on behalf of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. You just can't do that. So anyway, that's a whole other.
That's so insane. I mean, like this whole thing with resisting the elections is just so out there, really, and it's happening just because of the raw energy that this massive group of people has. A lot of them in power that are pushing this stuff, but really, it's just. I mean, in the courts, even the really most conservative judges you can imagine are saying this is bullshit. So, I mean,
exactly.
It's governance by narrative. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, there was a bar owner who was prevented from opening, and he got in his car and he rammed a bunch of New York City cops. And he became a cause celeb on Fox. Okay. Now which this is like, they're for law and order, right? But this guy just rammed the cops. So which is it, guys? I mean, they are insane. They are literally from day to day. They are claiming things that are exactly in opposition to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And they know that their constituency doesn't matter. It doesn't matter their constituency. We're talking about a crisis of reasoning in this show,
just
right?
Raw emotion.
It doesn't matter. It's just raw emotion. There is literally no reason there. We are all human animals, right? We are partly emotionally driven. We have two pieces of our brain, right? We have the lizard brain that is just purely sort of fight or flight emotional. We have our thinking brains. They are not operating with their freak thinking brains at all. And in fact, they're being encouraged explicitly to not think with that brain, right? Because if you do think with that brain, you will see the hypocrisy. Like right away, you'll see the hypocrisy.
It's very medieval.
Definitely. I want to sort of we're at an hour now. We've been talking, which is awesome, and I want to we've talked a lot about the United States, and we've talked about vaccines. We've talked about there's other vaccines there. We have the one of my favorites is the Russian vaccine, which means you can't drink for a month afterward. Which really? For me is just you can't drink for a month after you take the vaccine, which for me is just a non-starter. But also, by the way, it's like Russia. I mean, come on, the stereotypes abound. So there's that, and then there's also a Chinese vaccine, which is like, I want to trust vaccines, but like China, oh boy, but China has a lot of influence in Africa and elsewhere. My point is this, and this is what I want to sort of talk about and round out this conversation with is developed nations are buying up all the vaccines, right? Like the vaccines don't exist in terms of the numbers that have been purchased yet. But they have purchased all of the vaccines, right? And so we're hoarding them. We have enough. They've purchased enough vaccines to vaccinate their entire populations twice, right? And meanwhile, developed nations are being left in the lurch. So I just want you guys to sort of comment on that. I mean, there's obviously a gross injustice here. How does this impact how the world is able to recover from this over the next several years?
Well, I mean, you have the way the geopolitical world is structured it benefits greatly the first world countries. It's set up that way. It's been set up that way since since colonialism. It just evolved from there. So there's so many structures, so many ways. Some of them are implicit, some of them are explicit, in which the developed countries just benefit from everything first. right? Why would it be any different for this? It's not, right? It's no different. And so really we have to start thinking about the fact that we need to restructure our world to make it more equitable at that level, because it's not. And it really isn't.
It's the same for a natural disaster, economic downturn.
Absolutely.
Every poorer country gets hit worse than we do. Although now we're in a situation where our politics actually caused us to be hit worse than a lot of poor countries. I mean, you look at India. India has 4 times the U.S. population, and it has fewer cases, like half the number of cases.
Astonishing.
It's astonishing. And this is India, where people are stacked on top of each other, right? And so they're not able to social distance, and they're still doing better than we are. And I think it has everything to do with what I was talking about earlier, is that it is a traditional communal culture. And I think that they comply for those reasons. They wouldn't even think about behaving like Americans.
No. The same thing with Africa, by the way. Those countries in Africa are doing it phenomenal, most of them. They're dealing with this pandemic so much more effectively than we are. You know, we have to look into that. I mean, it's just a fantastic
look into that. Yeah, that's a big thing.
And I think, Sean, I think that's a big part of it. I think there's this consciousness about group dynamics and being responsible for your community that's just ingrained in these cultures, and it's been sort of eroded away in ours. It disappeared over the centuries, over the decades anyway. It's just not there anymore, not nearly as much as it was. We just don't have it.
If you look at some of that footage from like Koyaanisqatsi or Baraka or these places, and you see these traditional cultures and the way that they work together, and it's mind-boggling to us. And that's why those films were so profound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what's interesting too, and I'm thinking about this now, right? We're talking about these traditional cultures and typically developing nations, and then as we talked about at the very top, or I mentioned at the top of this segment anyway, is that Australia is doing really well, New Zealand's doing really well. Of course, it helps that they're an island, obviously, but there is, and I was reading about this earlier this week, there is a sense there that there is a sense of community there, like being Australian, that is beyond the individual, even though they're about as close to America as you can get, right? In terms of, even in some ways more than the UK in some ways, because right. They're more like the sort of like, Wild West type feel, American style, but they've managed a nation of immigrants, but they have somehow found a way, maybe just because they trust their government, like they trust government. They don't have a decades long assault against the value of government.
This is what I was going to say, is that I believe that in our country, we would have naturally occurring community spirit that we used to have. And I blame entirely the right-wing ecosystem for ginning up all of this opposition, ginning up these protests and these demonstrations, because it gives people a cause. And, they're angry because obviously there's a lot of pain and trauma associated with this pandemic, and they're angry about it. And it gives them a focus for their anger. Instead of directing it into the community, they direct it into anti-community efforts, and they call any of this socialism and tyranny. And that was not there. It was there to a lesser extent, but it just wasn't mainstream. And now the break point is really, right around the millennium. Fox News started in 96. Rush Limbaugh started before that. But you had this massive agitation. They just turned the crank 24/7 with this anti-community effort that they're mounting.
Yeah. These abstract ideas of liberty, right? That is completely divorced from practical outcomes, right? And then I think, add to that the decline, and we've talked about this before on the show, but it's worth repeating, the decline of civic institutions, right? The decline of churches, actually, although that's not of church-based communities, right? That used to be a social glue, right? For better or for worse, a lot of times for worse, but nevertheless, that declining membership, you combine that with that right-wing ecosystem that you're talking about, and next thing you know, you have a country where everyone thinks they have to, and also the ascendancy of libertarianism in the Republican Party, right? This idea that like everyone should sort of bunker themselves in their house and stockpile weapons, and it's like a war of all against all.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add to that is, I remember I did a graduate paper on Ybor City and the cigar makers Cuban cigar immigrants that worked there, and I looked at their communal structures there, in this paper, and they had all these social clubs, people used to go to and socialize in, lyceums, speaking houses, union halls, the veterans halls, all this stuff that would act as community centers. A lot of that has just disappeared from our society. There isn't, it's gone. And that's a big part of civil society, Yeah. And we're seeing the consequences of it. People are now turning to these abstract notions of freedom and individualism that are not rooted in anything.
Right. It's a generational assault on the country. And I mean, we did this to ourselves. It's one thing to think about Russian or Chinese influence. And of course, they'll put their thumbs on the scale and push us in that direction because they know it's tearing us apart. But if an enemy had done to us what we've done to ourselves, we'd have gone to war against them. And I say this all the time.
That's right. That's right.
There's so much to this, I mean, but ultimately the consequence is that we're helpless to really fight this pandemic.
We shall see. I mean, in the next 6 months will tell the tale.
I mean, you have this hope with a vaccine if enough people take it. Let's hope they do. But imagine if we didn't have this right now.
Oh my God.
And we'd be facing this for years, wave after wave, because that's what would happen. At least we have this vaccine that's giving us hope. Thank God for that. But I mean, we failed. We're not able to deal with this when the enemy is public health versus a killer virus. That's the enemy. And something is truly amiss.
Absolutely.
It's like you said about climate change earlier, and we're ill-equipped for the next one. We're ill-equipped for climate change. We're ill-equipped to really solve any large national problem at this point. And it's anybody's guess as to when we're able to turn that around.
The only real bright spot, and it's really hopeful, is the technological side, the scientific side. If we can solve this pandemic so quickly, if we can get the tools, maybe we can do the same thing with climate change. If we put our minds and effort and heart into it and resources, maybe we can, temper the catastrophes that are coming with that, because they are coming. I mean, and you guys know that. I mean, it's just a matter of watching how it all plays out. But that we have this incredible human ability to innovate and come up with solutions. We really do, which is amazing. That's the bright side. The difficult side is what you were saying, Christoph, earlier, but our human nature is really kind of working against us right now. Our own human nature. We can be very tribal. We can be very irrational. We can be very stubborn in so many ways. And, we created all these wonderful institutions to try to mitigate that over the centuries, but you also need people to go to, you have all these unwritten rules, all these unwritten ethics, all of these things that people have to abide by. And if they decide not to, the thing falls apart. Right? The laws only cover a percentage of it. Most of it is just customs, right? And
absolutely. And we've seen why it's important to have some teeth. That those customs, we're fighting and we're fighting an adversary on the political right, a worldwide political right, and just power, money, right, and that's part of the human brain and that drive. And we are fighting an institution that will not play by the rules. That if there are even if there are rules, they won't play by them. But certainly, if there are no rules, and Trump is the perfect example of this, if you're running on pure custom or just trying to do the right thing or being a statesman, they will eat our lunch every single time. And we're running out of time here, but I want to just give you the final word, Joe. But to just what do you have to say to us?
Well, I hope what I'm hoping that there's a silver cloud. No, silver clouds are good too. I don't know. Silver lining that comes out of this pandemic is that we learn that we have to reorganize our ways. We have to do better. That we have to figure out how to be more functional as a society, and that's going to mean putting restrictions on we have to deplatform people who are causing all this chaos, right? We just do. And people can rail and scream about censorship, but if we don't have some kind of control over truth, we're not going to get very far. Something's going to take us out, whether it's this pandemic or whatever, something, because you cannot have a society that is so divorced from the truth as we are right now. We are so divorced from the stuff that we need to understand, like how to fight a pandemic, like how to mitigate climate change, like how to have an election, right? Peaceful transfer of power. And I mean, there's still some good things. I mean, if those Republican officials, electoral officials, had not been professional, had not done their jobs, had not abided by the norms, guess what? The institutions would have failed.
Yeah.
Same thing with the legal system. Those judges had decided, fuck it, I'm just going to do what I feel is right instead of what the law says. It would have been done. It would have been a coup.
And that's a terrifying, terrifying thought. We are, man, I know we can count ourselves lucky. But like you're saying, and like we've talked about on this show, and we're talking about in this particular episode of the show, is that, we can't count on that, right? We cannot keep counting on three individuals to say let's do the right thing. Like that is not enough to safeguard democracy. It is not enough. It is not enough.
And so we have to reinvigorate a sense of the common good, a sense of the civics and ethics and justice. We have to really focus on those principles, because honestly, America is founded on ideas more than anything else. There's a lot of natural divisions, I guess you would call them, but they're fine. They work fine. You don't have to. Not everybody has to be united or the same, right? That's the whole point of having a multicultural, right? The diversity, difference, but there have to be some kind of glue that keeps it all working together, and that's the ideas. The ideals of this country have done that for the United States. Nothing else has, really. Otherwise, there's no reason for having these United States if we don't have that. And that's what I think that's what we have to work on. This is what you guys are doing in this show, I think, and really is, which is really heartening to me that you're doing that. And I'm trying to do the same thing on my end, the ways that I can.
Absolutely, man. And
then work and hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. And so with that, I really want to thank you, Joe. Like I said at the top, we really just love talking to you, whether it be online, whether it be here. You are not only the first person to be the second to come back a second time, you're the first person to come back a third time on the show. And look, we're happy that we're just really happy that you were here, man. So thanks a lot.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm really happy that I can contribute to your project. I think it's a very worthwhile project.
We think you're a part of the project at this point.
Exactly.
I love that. That's awesome.
All right, guys. Well, that's it for this segment. Again, thanks so much, Joe.
All right. Take care, guys.
I had such a great time talking to Joe, man. As always, Sean, what sticks out for you? Anything?
I think we said it all in the segment. And I think, Joe just brings a real sensibility to this. And I'm really grateful for all of the work and the research that he does. So I think we just have to keep having him back.
Absolutely, man. He's part of the fucking crew now. All right. Well, we're about at time. We always end up going over time, but hey, we have great conversations here. So thanks everybody for listening. Once again, I want to remind you to make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that red subscribe button. And be sure to give us a 5-star rating on your podcast host and write us a review over at Apple. Positive podcast reviews at Apple will help us grow in their recommendation list faster than almost anything else. And tell your friends and family about the show. Word of mouth really does matter. And look, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Joe, for being here. Thank you, Sean, for being an awesome friend and host. And remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.